Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3, and in this video I'm going to talk about the most fun and engaging Legendary Lords races campaigns that you can have while playing the game. But what is fun? Obviously people have different perspectives on that, but I think that beyond the fact that it's always going to be subjective, that fun is always going to be subjective, I think that what can make a campaign fun, a race more fun to play than others, is if they're not one-dimensional, if they do have more complex mechanics. So someone like Scarbrand is off the list. Someone like Tarax is also off the list. Because yeah, it's fun to play Beastmen, it's fun to play Scarbrand if you're into playing a lot of battles, but they're fairly one-dimensional. What about the Warriors of Chaos? They have more complex mechanics. Yes, they do, but the problem is they're so far ahead of the curve over any other race because of their instant recruitment, that their campaign is a steamroll that never ends. Because your key core territories are safe. Dark fortresses very rarely come under threat, and they generally tend to be in fairly safe areas to begin with. So Warriors of Chaos can expand across the map very quickly, very efficiently, without any serious opposition, without having to really bother defending their core territories. Also, because they rely so heavily on vassals, the vassals themselves will do a lot of that defending for you, allowing you to just go from battle to battle to battle. Don't get me wrong, that can be fun, but yeah, they're a bit too much of a steamroll. And actually, this is one of the reasons I'm doing this video, because people have asked me, well, what's a fun campaign that isn't a steamroll campaign? Well, it's fairly subjective, of course. Different people like different things, but I think that certain races, certain Legendary Lords, certain factions do better than others. It's finding that sweet spot between having good mechanics, but not being a steamroll, not being an unstoppable steamroll, which doesn't have to fight for it, which doesn't have any degree of challenge when you are playing as them. So with that said, let's get going. At number 5 on this list, we have the Greenskins. Any of the Greenskin Legendary Lords will be fun to play because their mechanics are pretty good, in a pretty good state, but they're not a complete unstoppable steamroll. Even Grom the Paunch over here, who I've selected, even he has to fight for his dinner, so to speak. Yes, he does gain significant buffs through the Cauldron mechanic, and he does have the Scrap mechanic for his green boys, giving him significant power. But he also starts in Bretonnia surrounded by enemies, if I toggle the Fog of War. So he's got Athaloran to his east, Carcassonne to the south, plenty of Bretonnian factions, and his campaign goal also is to take down Ulthuan pretty much. He's one of the few Legendary Lords that don't start in Ulthuan, they can colonize Ulthuan. And fighting the Elves can be a bit of a challenge, though with Nasty Skulkers and Goblin Archers and large numbers of those, and Trolls later on, you certainly can decimate them. But I'd say the Greenskins are just very close when it comes to being too much of a steamroll faction, but they don't quite make the cut. Warriors of Chaos and Vampire Counts certainly do make the cut in that list of factions, races, Legendary Lords that just are too strong right now. I'm not saying they should be nerfed. I think Creative Assembly has done a great job with them, but the other races just end up being behind them. That's the key element. I think Greenskins are just very close to that edge, which is why Grom is number 5, despite the fact that he has an amazing campaign in a lot of ways. He is one of the strongest Legendary Lords in the game. He has a lot of power behind it. But things are not so cut and dry when it comes to Greenskins, be it in their tech tree, in their economy. Yeah, they do have a good economy, but they do need settlements. They can't just rely on a couple Dark Fortresses and that will get the job done. They do actually need to acquire territory. Even Grom, who can literally print money. I'd say Grom is the best Legendary Lord of the Greenskins because he does have an extra mechanic compared to all of them, which is the Cauldron, which gives you a significant amount of power. True, if you want a harder campaign, play something like Skarsnik or Azag, maybe even a Warzag and Grimgore, but if you want the most complex campaign of the Greenskins, yeah, complexity tied to the Greenskins, I would strongly recommend playing Grom the Paunch. He is just a lot more interesting to play due to the Cauldron mechanic than other Greenskin Legendary Lords, I would say, at the moment. He's also got, technically, he's got the hardest start of all of them, which should give you an idea of how powerful this guy is, because he starts in territory that's not really ideal for him, and he's got a lot of factions that will be gunning for him, but he can certainly make short work of them. that's what I'd say it makes this a fun campaign. You have a lot of battles, but you also have the tools to deal with those battles in a fairly effective and efficient manner. It does hit that sweet spot from my perspective, though it's very close to going over the edge, and I'm sure he would go over the edge for a lot of people in turning into going to that territory where he's just too strong. He can be, absolutely, he can be a bit too strong. But yeah, Grom, number 5 on this list. Now, number 4, we have the Skaven, and specifically Throt the Unclean. The Skaven are in a pretty good spot as a race. They do start out a bit weak, and what I mean by that is that pretty much all of the Legendary Lords are not going to start with very powerful settlements. And the Skaven are certainly a faction that does need higher level settlements to really get going. But once they get going, and you can abandon your starting settlements and reoccupy them at tier 3, maybe even tier 4, the Skaven, once they do get going, they do become very powerful. However, they do have some shortcomings. The weapon teams of Ikit Claw, for instance, yeah, they might beat any army in a field battle if they can actually manage to get favorable terrain to get the shots off, but gunpowder units are in a pretty rough spot at the moment in the game, in particular in minor settlement and siege battles. But Throt doesn't care about that because he's generally going to lead a monstrous army. That's his focus in his campaign. Monster units, rat ogres, brute horrors, hell pit abominations, and so on. That is what Throt focuses on in his campaign. And he does certainly have some interesting campaign mechanics. Though he has a harsh start, not just because hell pit starts level 1, but because the Kislev settlements, with which he will start a war with, because the Kislev settlements are not really good. They're minor settlements that will not offer a great deal to you if you are playing him. It's far better to start heading in the north, conquer parts of Norsca, take their territory, and then expand southward. Though try and avoid taking Kislev because it's honestly not worth it. Deal with some of the Norscan tribes, like in the mountains here, for instance. That might be well worth it, as I see it. But yeah, Throt is fun to play because he takes any unit, or the vast majority of units in his army, and he can customize them in one way or another. Like, he's got augments that he can put on his units. Like, you can you start with a couple unlocked, then you can unlock even more, and as you unlock even more, these units can become really, really powerful, giving them a significant amount of power. Though you can also go overboard, like I just did there, and make a unit very unstable. And with that instability, they'll just die in a battle. Though you can also recycle them, of course, for growth juice. The way it works is you fight a battle, you get growth juice starts being added to the growth vat. Once you reach a cap, you can flush the tanks and get some units, free units, or you can wait until it fills up fully, and then you get some really powerful free units, like a brute horror or a hell pit abomination. If I look, I have this particular army, I got the hell pit abomination. So you can get some really powerful units that are each customizable, or most of them are customizable. So you've got customization for infantry, customization for monsters. You've got various lab upgrades like, recruit rank for all growth rat units. Skaven slave units can be recruited with 1 or 5 random augments, so they can't be recycled. So you can get some really, really good Skaven slaves, which are generally one of the worst units you can recruit in the game. So there's a great degree of customization, and I'd say that having a fairly unique army, or having each unit in your army being fairly unique, can make things a lot more interesting in battle. And you always have to manage that on the campaign map, how you're going to customize them. Skaven are in a pretty good spot on the campaign map. They're good, but they also have some shortcomings. The shortcomings is that you do really want large provinces to make the most of their economy, and because you need a lot of structures to get their economy. Like, unlike many other races, Skaven generate income not just through one building, but through a lot of buildings, so it is less income. So you need to get a lot of structures, and then you need to get the warpstone reactor chained for the up to 50% income from all buildings province-wide, starting at 30% at tier 3. So yeah, Skaven are in a good spot, can be a great deal of fun, and I think that Creative Assembly has generally put a lot of love and care into their handling of the Skaven. Both the DLCs that they released for the Skaven are some of the best DLC packs that they've released in the history of the game. Claw is essential, and Throt is a great deal of fun. Well, sorry, the free DLCs, because you also have Snikch. I'll get to him in just a moment, because he's also a great pile of fun. But yeah, Skaven are in a pretty good spot, I would say. Skaven, Throt in particular, can be in a really good spot, and he's not the only one that's in a pretty good spot. I'd say the Skaven campaign mechanics work pretty decently well. Yeah, you don't have the laboratory that Claw is known for, so you're not going to get some of the overpowered upgrades that he has. You won't get nukes on the battlefield, which can be a bit of a shame. But what you do get is a great deal of individual unit customization, which makes his campaign a lot more fun and engaging than quite a lot of others in the game at the moment. Now, number 3, we have the Dark Elves, specifically Lokhir Fellheart, who could also just as easily go with Malice Darkblade, though I think Malice is a bit too strong and the area he's in is not the best. But why Lokhir Fellheart? Well, he starts in Cafe. His campaign, although you will certainly end up having to fight the Elves if you want to win the campaign, as a long campaign victory condition does require you to deal with the main High Elven factions, all of them. Although you will certainly end up fighting Elves, much of your early, mid-game, and even late game will be spent dealing with Cafe. And Cafe is one of the best areas in the game. The developers put a lot of love and care into it in its design. It looks amazing. It plays in an amazing way. It's not too crowded, though it can be a bit easy, I admit. It can be a bit too easy dealing with Cafe, regardless of the Legendary Lord you're playing. But Cafe is certainly a really good area. Unlike the vast majority of areas on the campaign map which were squished down to make them work in Immortal Empires, Cafe has been expanded by quite a substantial amount. And so ends up being a far better region than it was in the Realms Cast. It's actually the only exception to the rule, really, because most of the time, if a region of province and area of the campaign map is squished from the regular campaign to Immortal Empires, they suffer for it. Not Cafe. Cafe ends up being better for it. So the area you're going to spend most of your early game, or there you're going to spend a significant portion of your campaign, is one of the best in the game. And the Dark Elves are in a pretty good spot as a race. I haven't talked about them much before in previous videos, but that's because there's not much really to talk about when you're talking about the worst or the best. Because, yeah, they're not the best, but they're not the worst either. They're hitting that sweet middle spot. They have a good economy, they have good units, but they don't descend into steamroller territory, which the Greenskins can, the Vampire Counts can, the Warriors of Chaos absolutely do, but not the Dark Elves. They're in a pretty good spot, I feel, when it comes to their economy, their units, their Legendary Lords, unless you're playing poor Malekith, who is the worst Legendary Lord of the Dark Elves at the moment. But that's a discussion for a different video. Now, what makes the Dark Elves, and Lokhir in particular, more interesting, and you could put Malice Darkblade just as easily, though you have a far less interesting area than what Lokhir has, is the Black Arc situation. Dark Elves can get Black Arcs. You start with one if you're playing as Lokhir, or if you're playing as Malice Darkblade. And Black Arcs are incredibly good for recruitment. You can get many of your early game units through a Black Arc. You can get Black Arc Corsairs, then get Dark Shards and Blade Swords, and eventually get Reaper Bolt Throwers and Sisters of Slaughter. Those Sisters of Slaughter don't matter all that much. And you can get one of the best armies in the game very, very quickly in a campaign. Like, run around with multiple sacks of troops. But again, you do have to work for it. You do have to fight battles. You do have to protect the Black Arcs, which are fairly vulnerable unless you leave a significant garrison to defend them. And of course, and although there's certainly an upkeep benefit when it comes to that, it's, yeah, 50%. If you're maintaining a full garrison there, yeah, that 50% is not going to matter as much as one might believe. So there is downsides, of course, but there's a lot of upsides. The Black Arc Corsairs are some really good units. The Dark Shards are some really good units, and Lokhir's campaign is just really, really well designed. And I think the Dark Elves in general are really hitting that sweet middle spot between being strong and being between being good and just, you know, between the factions that are too strong and the factions that are too weak. They're certainly hitting that sweet middle spot. People are going to be annoyed by the slave mechanic, but honestly, I don't really see an issue. Yes, it's not as overpowered as it was in Warhammer 2. Absolutely, I can understand, but we have to admit, like, the Dark Elves and the High Elves were ridiculous. Hell, the High Elves still are ridiculous, although they've certainly been nerfed. But although you won't be generating the mountains of cash as you were before, you can still get a pretty good income. It's not the farce as it used to be. It's not the ridiculous OP nature as it was before, and certainly nowhere near the level of Warriors of Chaos, but it's a pretty good race at the moment, with some good Legendary Lords, some good factions to play. I'd say Dark Elves are in a pretty good spot. So if you're playing, if you want a race to play that is good, but not too good, I'd strongly recommend Dark Elves, and I'd strongly recommend Lokhir. His campaign is probably one of the most enjoyable that does exist in Cafe at the moment. Not that the Cafe and factions are bad, they're not. But in terms of enjoyment factor, in terms of fun factor, yeah, it's fun playing the Dark Elves as it is at the moment. Now, number 2, we have Snikch, Deathmaster Snikch of Clan Eshin. Another Cafe campaign, and yeah, he does get all the same benefits as Lokhir Fellheart. But he also is more interesting because, well, if you are playing Snikch, what you can have a lot of fun with is doing all of his clan actions, all of his shadowy dealings. Like, oh, want to eliminate the faction lord and throw them into chaos? Absolutely, go for it. Or, and kill a leader, like plunge into anarchy an entire faction by removing their faction leader, which Snikch actually did in the lore in the end times with the dwarfs and really plunged them into chaos. And you do also have plenty of other choices as well, taking money, assassinating leaders, getting food, a bunch of decisions over here. And then of course there are clan contracts as well for other major clans, Skaven clans. Of course, Clan Rictus doesn't get the spot on this, but the other ones, Clan Scoria, Clan Mulder, Clan Pestilin, and Clan Moors do get the spot, and they do have various missions aimed at one another, because the Skaven don't really like each other. And you're basically playing Skaven ninja assassins. That's what you're doing. You do have a pretty solid starting army. It's not the most powerful in the game, but it's pretty solid. You do have downsides in that you only have the ability to recruit Skaven slaves early on, which is going to be a downside. You can get Night Runners pretty quickly, like just, yeah, in one turn start recruiting Night Runners, take a territory here. I would say that taking this mountaintop can be something of an issue from the Greenskins, absolutely. But overall, Snikch is a powerful lord, but he's not so powerful that he descends into a farce. And just the assassin missions are fairly fun to deal with. Playing him is fairly fun. Playing Skaven in general can be fairly fun, and he just has more that extra mechanic. Yes, it's not the same army customization that Throt has, and some people might prefer Throt's mechanics, and I certainly am eager to play a campaign as Throt at one point or another to really make that work. But yeah, you know, I did a poll asking what campaign they'd like to see in Cafe, and by a fairly overwhelming margin, Snikch won. Because people do like it. Like, leading an army or leading armies of Skaven ninjas is fun. It genuinely is fun. And you will have to do that because recruiting units from, like recruiting Plague Claws, recruiting Storm Vermin and all that kind of stuff is going to cost you a great deal if you're playing Clan Eshin, because you do have a significant recruitment cost to those units by default. You can reduce it by doing clan contracts and even get a discount of 20% later on, along with some other benefits. But Snikch is a powerhouse. But Skaven are one of those races that do find that solid middle ground, because they're strong, but they're not so ridiculously strong. Though, to be clear, let's be very clear. If you're playing any race in the game, it doesn't matter which one it is, you can certainly get to a point pretty quickly, unless we're talking about Demon Prince, who is in a really bad space. But as most races, you can certainly get in a space where you're just dominating your opponents on the campaign map. That's the case for everyone. If you know what you're doing, that's certainly something you can do as any race, any faction. But how you do it is just as important. And I would say leading an army of assassins is fun and engaging and interesting, and you do have a good province or a good area to do that in. Like engaging in the assassin games in Cafe, conquering all of Cafe, bending it to your will. That is fun. And then having options across the map. On top of that, because you do have those client contracts, one of the things about those client contracts is that when you do them, you're actually going to gain vision of the Skaven faction. The main Skaven factions be a Throt, Queek, Skrulk, and Ikikla, right? And you eventually may even be able to get such good diplomatic relations with them that you could potentially confederate with them. So you're not just stuck dealing with Cafe. You can have a Skaven legendary lord that may end up playing across the world, dependent on how you're playing your cards. And I think that's what makes that's what makes Snikch so very, very interesting to play, as opposed to many other factions that exist in the game. And number one, of course, it is Oxyotl of the Lizardmen. Now, I don't think much of the Lizardmen in general. I think they're pretty dull, actually, in terms of their style. I just don't like them all that much. But I do like Oxyotl's campaign a great deal. Because, yes, you do have the Lizardmen faction. They're in a pretty decently balanced state, actually. They do generate a decent amount of income. They have good units. They have good heroes, etc. They have quite a few things going for them. But that's not why Oxyotl gets this spot. His area is fairly safe and kind of boring, really. The southern castways are pretty boring, pretty dull. But if that was it, if his campaign was just like conquer the southern castways and then either go to Lustria or go to the Southlands, yeah, this campaign would not get a spot on this list. However, the reason Oxyotl gets the top spot on this list comes down to the vision of the old one. So what Oxyotl has to do if you are playing as him is he periodically gets mission around the campaign map to teleport to various locations and do certain actions. Doing those actions will give you benefits like melee attack and melee defense to all armies, or you'll get 10 growth to all armies. There are some downsides, not necessarily too significant on the easy ones, though the hard ones will have significant downsides, and nothing quite like invading the castways and having a full stack of top tier 5 demons spawning in your province, which is exactly what happened here in this campaign. I dealt with it without a resolve, but I did pay an enormously heavy price. I basically lost half my army, or more than half my army, dealing with them. So there is difficulty, and it's dynamic, because the missions are dynamic. People have likened it to Warhammer XCOM. That's what they've described it as, and I think it does hold up to that. Is it as difficult and frustrating as XCOM can be? No. But it does have some of those good elements, like the random factor around the world, the campaign dealing with issues, chaos mainly, around the world, which makes it interesting. It's not purely chaos. There's Vampire Coast, factions of chaos, factions of disorder, if you will, that you will have to deal with and put in their place. It is only with Oxyotl's army, so you are going to do most of that with just his army, teleporting around the map, dealing with the various issues. Like I've gained some missions in Lustria, I've gained some missions in the Southlands. I've met Kairos Way Fate Weaver on one of the campaigns I was playing as Oxyotl. It is fun dealing with some of those threats early on, and having a campaign where what you do does change from turn to turn, does change from campaign to campaign, because you can get a wide variety of different objectives if you are playing as Oxyotl. You also have a different gameplay style than most Lizardmen. Like if you're playing a Lizardmen campaign, most of the time what you're going to do is you're going to go Saurus, right? That's generally the good plan. It works very well. Unless you're going for the dive bombers, so to speak. Those dive bombers with tic-tac-toe will do a pretty good job. Absolutely, but he's also an exception. But most of the legendary lords for Lizardmen, yeah, you're gonna use the Saurus Doomstack. If you're playing Oxyotl, you don't do that. You focus on Skinks, Chameleon Stalkers, Red-Crested Skinks, Chameleon Skinks, all that. Those are the units you want to get if you're playing as Oxyotl, because you get significant benefits to those units. You're playing a different army than what most Lizardmen would play with, and you're doing a really good job. He is like, he's fighting a guerrilla war against chaos and the forces of disorder, and it's something very well reflected, I'd say, in his campaign mechanics. I didn't realize how much fun Oxyotl could be until Immortal Empires came out. I'm not gonna lie, I actually didn't play any single Lizardman campaign before Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires came out. I didn't care about it. Yeah, I got all the DLC for them, but I got the DLC for them for other reasons. I got the Oxyotl DLC for the sake of getting Tarax, for instance. I got the Cult of Sotek DLC to get access to Ikit Claw. Much more interesting. I've never liked Lizardmen all that much. So believe me when I say that Oxyotl being fun and interesting and engaging as a campaign is very well earned, because it's very different than anyone else. Sure, other legendary lords may decide to go around the world. As Oxyotl, you are going to go around the world. Like, yeah, you can teleport a Scarbrand to a location of a cult. You can set up a cast portal as Be'lakor. And those teleportation campaigns in general are considered some of the most fun and interesting. But Oxyotl is going to do it constantly. He's not just going to teleport to an area and start conquering. No, he's going to go in, swoop in, kill whatever he has to kill, occupy whatever he has to occupy, get out, so he's not tied to any area. The only area he's tied to is the Southern Castways, and even then, not really. You could certainly go play wherever you want on the campaign map. And then you get out, you teleport out. The teleportation is instant. And it happens around the world. Let me just get a spawn. Then say, for instance, I click there. You can do it with movement points. You'll still have that. You'll still have those movement points. You can do it when you don't have movement points. Quite a great deal of fun. Now, here, and it can lead to certainly some very unexpected situations. Like, for instance, here, if I take down this army, I'll end up in a war with Valkia. Now, do I care about that? Well, she's very far to the north. She's very far away from my starting position, so she's not necessarily going to be a problem. But I actually think having someone play Oxyotl could be a great deal of fun, not just if you're playing him alone, but also if you're playing, like, say, a co-op campaign. I think someone playing Oxyotl could certainly change the nature of those campaigns in a significant fashion. And that's what I like about him. That's why I think he's really fun and interesting. He really spices campaigns around in a way no one else does, or comes even close to doing. And that's all there is to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.